Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
The incidence of children's illness has been steadily increasing over the past several decades. This is more than alarming. What's going on? What can be done? Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. With us this hour to discuss children's health and how to support it is Dr. Piper Gibson. Dr. Gibson is a functional medicine and holistic nutrition expert who helps overwhelmed parents naturally reduce their child's tic disorder symptoms. She founded the Tic Disorder Institute, Regenerating Health, and is the author of the international best-selling Tic Talk, Common Misconceptions, Natural Approaches, and Real Conversations about tic disorders. Piper combines food, functional labs, and natural tools to guide families towards real lasting change. Her website, regenerating.health. Dr. Gibson, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me today.
That's wonderful. I mean, I personally have been very concerned about what's going on with our children. And so I'm glad we're going to have this conversation and maybe start to uncover some of the things that are going on. So you're a functional medical doctor, holistic nutritional expert. Are you also a medical doctor?
I am not a medical doctor. I am a PhD.
Okay, so the doctor is a PhD, not an MD.
Correct.
Got it. But it sounds like you've had a lot of, you spent a lot of time studying holistic medicine, functional medicine, that sort of thing.
Absolutely. For the past 13 years, since my own son was diagnosed with a transient neurological tic, I have been studying and relearning everything I thought I knew about health and wellness in order to help him and others like him.
So it's not just the children with tic, but are you finding that that these things that you're discovering and advocating are helping other children with chronic illness?
Oh, absolutely. We see a huge connection with all sorts of other illnesses children are experiencing, from ADHD to sensory processing disorder, and even things as simply acceptable as anxiety. So
I've been very curious, having had a child that was diagnosed with ADD and ADHD. There seems to be a huge increase in the children that are diagnosed with that and the use of Ritalin and all that fun sort of stuff. What is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is multiple factors. We live in probably the most toxic time period in history. Our kids are being exposed to pesticides, herbicides, toxins around every corner. I mean, things that we're cleaning our homes with, or we're cleaning our homes with. I definitely see issues with food, diet, nutrition. I mean, we have kids starting their day with 31 grams of sugar when they should be focusing on protein so that they can make those neurotransmitters that they need throughout the day to focus and function. So I really feel like it is all encompassing so many different factors, from environmental to the things that we're eating, that are really impacting our child's health.
Do you feel that, the increase in EMFs is part of it as well?
Absolutely. I think that is very significant. I mean, if you think about the fact that, most of us are probably sitting right next to our Wi-Fi box at this point, and that Wi-Fi can travel through our walls, it's definitely going through your brain and your skin and your body. So I would say in my practice, I see less of the EMF effect at this point, but I've definitely seen it in the older population. Absolutely.
Why so much more in the older population?
No, I'm not sure. I just noticed that those that have more autoimmune conditions, their immune systems have already been run down a little bit, are far more sensitive to the EMFs, in my opinion.
Oh, okay. I understand now. Yeah. Okay. So are children's illnesses increasing across the globe or just in particular areas?
Yeah, absolutely. They are increasing across the globe. We see it very significantly in the United States, but we are seeing it rise. We have clients that we're working with in Australia and the UK who we're seeing very similar symptoms, and we're seeing very similar issues, but I would say definitely very concentrated in the US.
So what do you attribute that to?
Definitely those multiple factors. Here where I live in the United States, in New Mexico, the kids get free breakfast. When you start to analyze what they're feeding the kids for breakfast, from crumb cake to fruit punch, that does not start a quality day for these kids. We're seeing so many other impacts, especially, here in the US, where we're looking at things like making America healthy again. And there's a big issue with vaccines and discussion about vaccines and the chemicals that are in the vaccines. And so there's so many factors, also the environmental factors, kind of like I mentioned previously, is, kids are eating food that's previously been sprayed in with glyphosate to desiccate it and dry it out. And so they're being exposed to chemicals just right off the bat as soon as they're putting things in their mouth. So we're just seeing this compound factor influencing their health overall.
So with our medical practices supposedly advancing, why are so many children struggling with these chronic health issues?
Because we are putting a focus on how we are treating symptoms. How do we put a Band-Aid on it? Oh, you have a neurological symptom. We're just going to put a Band-Aid on it. We're not really figuring out what is the root. And so I really feel that there is a lot of miscommunication between medical and their patients, because, we go to the doctor and we're told diet does not impact your child's symptoms. But through my research, through my education, through all of my nutritional training, I can tell you how much diet impacts these children's neurological health. And now my son is almost 20 years old, and he can tell you hands down, nutrition makes such an impact on his gut, his health, his brain. So I think there's a big disconnection between what is being taught in medical schools and what is being practiced with patients, and then what patients are taking away from that.
Like you said, it's a Band-Aid society, isn't it? So,
Absolutely.
the norm, for busy parents is to throw some of those wonderful Fruit Loops, and well, I didn't say that, but sugar infested, very highly processed, with artificial dyes and probably GMO grown to start out with. They're so far from the way nature intended and that's what they're starting their days with. And you telling me that at schools the free breakfasts are similar?
Very similar. Crumb cake is a big one that they love to serve. So they get crumb cake, they get fruit punch, first thing in the morning. And when we start to look at, the protein content and what these kids actually need, it's very lacking. And I have sat down at the schools with a gigantic notebook full of ingredients. And to be completely honest, the healthiest thing that I found was the whole wheat chocolate donut, which isn't healthy in the first place with all of the sugar, but it was the best thing on the menu. So it's really disheartening to see what so many kids in school are being fed, and then what parents actually think is healthy.
And it's the lack of education in that regard sounds to be glaringly deficient.
Absolutely. We have a medical school here. I've talked with many of the medical students, and when we start to talk about nutrition, they say, well, we get 1 hour of nutrition training. And I'm like, one like college credit hour? And they're like, no, 1 hour Zoom training on nutrition. And I'm like, you cannot in a practice talk to your patients about nutrition when you don't have the background. So they don't have the education to be able to turn around and serve their patients with that information.
Yes, I was interviewing a doctor and I asked him, I said, so how much, and he's gone on to learn about nutrition and is moving towards like what you are. Hey, we've got to fix this. But I said, how much education did you get in medical school on nutrition? He said the same thing, 1 hour. I said, 1 credit hour? He goes, no, 1 hour. It's like, okay, but aren't we what we eat?
Yeah, it's very disheartening, and we can't fault the medical practitioners for that education. That's what they're getting. But I definitely think we're seeing some changes here in the US, but I definitely think we need all over the world to focus more on what kids especially are putting in their mouth. So right now, the huge term out there that everyone is using is longevity. And I'm like, wait a second. Longevity doesn't start when you're 40 or 30. Longevity starts at birth. What are we, one, as a mother's consuming? And two, what are we feeding our kids to give them that long, healthy life? If we look at life expectancy, it's definitely dropping.
That's amazing too, isn't it? We've got all these supposedly modern conveniences in the medical field, and our life expectancy is dropping and dropping and dropping. And furthermore, it looks like our quality of life is taking a dive as well.
Absolutely would agree with that. I mean, in all aspects, if we look at even quality of life, that, what we're building our homes with are cheap material that then get moldy and make everybody sick living in them. Like, it's really interesting to really start to analyze what's really going on with our health in society.
So, how do the health issues children are facing today differ from, say, 50 years ago?
Well, 50 years ago, I would say definitely the food has changed drastically. And while, I'm 45, so when I was a kid and I was eating things like whole wheat bread, they were not at the time cut down, and my wheat was not sprayed with glyphosate. So, we're seeing that we're trying to make these processes faster and more efficient. How can we dry out this wheat faster? And we're, spraying them with things like glyphosate to dry them out. So, the food has changed drastically. If we look at the nutrient content of a tomato from 50 years ago versus now, we're really lacking in those important things like magnesium. Our soil is so deplete of magnesium. So, and definitely when we are looking at children's health, we're looking at food. We also have to look at the fact that 50 years ago, we were getting 10 vaccines possibly. And now we're looking at 80. My son is 19 and he became a firefighter, and we were looking at the requirements that he needed. And the list was 900 miles long about things that really 50 years ago, we were not giving our kids. So we're giving them far more, adjuvants, aluminum, heavy metals. We're cleaning and using so many more chemicals that weren't on the market 50 years ago. So we've definitely seen huge environmental shifts in what is in and around our bodies as far as epigenetic factors go.
And the thing of it is, 50 years ago, they weren't dealing with GMOs and all of this stuff. And then or humans got a better idea and started altering the way things were designed to be. And I think we're reaping the rewards, aren't we?
Absolutely. I would 100% agree with that.
It's a conundrum, to say the very least.
It is. That is a good word for it.
So who on earth are the ones that decide on the free breakfast for those kids? Who decided on that?
Yeah, here in the US, we're directed by the USDA and the FDA to make those decisions. And so when the USDA sets up their regulations for how much protein, carbs, fats, which is those macronutrients kids should be getting in a day, they really actually don't look at the sugar content. And so we're consuming far more sugar and getting far less protein. And so the importance is the macro, but not the nutritional status. And we need to be looking at what is that nutritional status that we're feeding our kids, not just the proteins, fats, and carbs. How much vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D, how much of that are these kids getting? And, the protein, like I've said over and over and over, is so significant for these kids for brain development.
And so if they don't, we're just about out of time in this segment, but if they don't get the protein they need, then their brains don't develop properly?
Yeah, exactly. Because our bodies are using amino acids to create our neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, things that we're using to focus and function and feel good throughout the day. And so protein really is a building block for life.
Hugely important. Well, it is that time. Dr. Gibson and I will return very shortly, so please don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How can dysfunction be normal? With us this hour discussing children's health is Dr. Piper Gibson, the author of Tic Talk, Common Misconceptions, Natural Approaches, and Real Conversations about Tic Disorders. Her website, regenerating.health. Dr. Gibson, we were just talking before we went to the break about how important the proper nutrition, particularly protein, is for a developing brain. Are we seeing a lot of these neurological dysfunctions, if you will, in children as a result of the lack of nutrition?
I definitely think it's a result of lack of nutrition. But what we are really seeing, and the studies are showing, is that it's really dysregulated immune systems. So a lot of these kids with neurological issues, especially tic disorders, we are seeing dysregulated immune systems. They are being exposed to so many things: environment, nutrition, lifestyle, chemicals, heavy metals. They're being exposed to so many things that are basically dysregulating their immune systems. They end up with a lot of inflammation, which causes a lot of inflammation in the brain in their microglial cells, which are those specialized cells in the brain. for the immune system. And so we are seeing this dysregulation between the brain and the gut. And we know that for every one signal your gut sends to your brain, or for every one signal your brain sends to your gut sends about 10 signals to your brain. Your gut is very, very bossy. So we are seeing a lot of kids with gut dysbiosis, leaky gut, gut dysfunction, which really leads to that imbalanced immune system impacting their brains. And so it's a combination of so many things, but really what we are looking at, especially in my practice, is dysregulated immune systems in these kids with neurological issues.
So when you have a dysregulated immune system, do you get autoimmune stuff going on?
You absolutely can. And we see that. And so with the younger population, the pediatric population that we're currently working with, we are starting to see this autoimmune emerge with them earlier and earlier. But the problem is they get to be 20, 30. And not only do they have one autoimmune disease from this dysregulation, but they have 2 or 3 or 4 different autoimmune diseases. We know most people who have an autoimmune disease now in the adult population have 2 or more autoimmune diseases. They don't just have one. So it really is across the board that we're seeing this dysregulated immune system across, populations from pediatrics to adults. But with the kids, we are definitely seeing autoimmune things like thyroid issues start to emerge so much earlier than previously.
So what do you mean when you say we've normalized dysfunction in our kids?
Well, it's acceptable. So for me, when I took my son to the doctor 13 years ago, they were like, oh, just ignore it. He'll grow out of it. That was the answer that we got. And parents today are still getting that answer. Their kids have uncontrollable body movements, and we're telling them, just ignore it. They'll grow out of it. And we're just making it acceptable. Everybody has ADHD, and everybody's taking an ADHD medication. We know that at least 25% of kids in school right now are on an ADHD medication. And so when little Timmy and little Joey start talking, and they're like, oh, it's just normal. We're taking our medication. Instead of figuring out, well, what's at the root? Why does little Timmy and little Joey have the ADHD in the first place? Why do they need this medication? So we're back to this. It's normal because we're just going to put a Band-Aid on it and everybody's dealing with it. Instead of figuring out, why is everybody dealing with this?
Yeah, it's like you put out the fire alarm instead of the fire. So when what percentage did you say of the children are on drugs for ADD, ADHD at
It's
the time?
about 25% of kids in school right now.
25%.
Mm-hmm.
And those drugs can't be good for their little bodies.
They're not. And what totally fascinates me about so many of the medications that are prescribed to these kids, especially the kids with tic disorders and Tourette's, really this neurological uncontrollable body movement, is a lot of these medications, the side effects are uncontrollable body movements. So it makes absolutely no sense why we are prescribing these medications for kids. Parents are coming in saying, my kid has an uncontrollable body movement. And we're not looking at the medication as a cause for the uncontrollable body movement. It's just astounding to me.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. So what are the most common symptoms you're seeing in children that shouldn't be ignored?
Yeah, I will say if I looked back at my son's health from the time he was born, chronic gut issues, diarrhea, constipation, reflux, 3 big signs that your infant or your toddler has something deeper going on in their body. They should be having a bowel movement regularly. They should not be having reflux and, what is called cyclical vomiting these days. So those are some really good pointers. A lot of times we see kids start out with, heavy eye blinking and we're told, oh, it's just allergies. But really for a lot of parents whose kids have tic disorders, that's kind of the first sign of their child's tics. And then it just grows from there. Your child's teacher calls in kindergarten and was like, they can't sit still. They cannot concentrate. They cannot think. I know here that now you don't even necessarily need a medical doctor's diagnosis for autism. The school can observe you and say you have autism. And it really floors me because these kids are getting a diagnosis based on observation only. They're not getting tested. They're not, we're not looking at blood work. We're not looking at stool pathogens. We're not looking at, so many different things that we could be looking at. What is causing this issue? And we're really just kind of writing these kids off as, hey, this is normal. This is just how it is.
Well, I find it appalling that we
It
have
is.
people that are not professionals diagnosing.
It is. I was shocked. My sister-in-law works for the schools, and when she told me that, she told me in the last 30 years as a teacher that she has seen this huge rise in autism. She works in special education, and she said it's just been astounding to see the difference between 30 years ago and now. And when she told me, she said, you know, at this point, the school can observe them and say, you have autism. I'm like, that is just absolutely wild to me.
It's really wrong to
Mhm.
me. So what illnesses are children exhibiting that modern medicine is totally missing?
Yeah. ADHD, ADD, anxiety, sensory processing disorder, these kids who like don't like their collars or the seams on their socks. Definitely when we look at the space of tic disorders and Tourette's, the common recommendation is just ignore it. They'll grow out of it. And so, that's a huge red flag is my kid cannot control their body movements, but you're telling me to ignore it. Like something is going on in my child's body. Um, all of these different issues where we're looking at the acronyms that are fitting OCD, oppositional defiant disorders, all of these things are really what we are commonly seeing at this stage in the game.
So what are the traditional approaches often missing the root cause? What's going on there?
Yeah, I really am going to take it back to the fact that we talked about earlier is the education. And when we're looking at the way that most conventional medicine is trained versus something like functional medicine or holistic medicine, is they're really trained like what is that symptom and what is the drug that we can apply to that symptom to help mitigate your symptoms. And so when we start to look at the fact that there's that huge disconnect in education, whereas the functional providers, the MDs out there, the DOs, the chiropractors, the holistic medicine practitioners, traditional naturopaths out there who are working in the field and looking at function is how do we restore function to the body? And this is where we start to look at how do we get to the root cause. There's not enough people asking why. They're just accepting, oh, this is my symptom and this is the Band-Aid. Not asking why. Why is this happening? Why am I having these symptoms? And what can we do about it?
So if we follow that dysfunction, if you will, down the ages of our life, is there a place where you just can't turn it around anymore because it's been band-aided to death?
I don't think so, especially in kids, because kids are so resilient. And if we can stop and change course, they usually will spring back to life. And I've seen some of them spring back to life in, as quickly as like 3 to 4 months. Some of them it takes longer. And, I like to say you've lived your way into this. We have to live our way out of it. We are such a society of instant gratification. We want it right now. And when it comes to our health, that just isn't possible. Parents think they're going to put in a supplement or change their diet, and their kids' symptoms are going to completely go away overnight. But really, when you live your way into it, you spend 10 years eating garbage and not getting good sleep and exercising your thumbs all day. It's going to take you quite a bit of time to live your way out of it. But kids are so resilient that we do see them bounce back, fairly quickly as opposed to adults.
So have you seen within your practice, have you seen children with pretty severe tic disorder or Tourette's or autism? Have you seen them turn around?
Absolutely. So my son being one of them, he had several diagnoses, but one of my favorite stories is I have a client. She came to me 4, maybe 5 years ago at this point. She had been diagnosed with, I think it was 13 different things. She had Tourette's, she had OCD, she had ADHD. She was on like 8 to 10 medications. Mom had taken her to the neurologist, to the specialist, and they said, there's nothing you can do. You've maxed out the amount of medication she has. There's not a thing you can do. She's just going to have to live with it. And I've seen videos of this child. She was doing, you know what a burpee is when people are exercising? She was doing burpees, like hitting her knees on the concrete 15, 20, 500 times a day, just over and over again. She was miserable. So when mom came to me and we did the functional testing, we looked at her gut and her genes, we were able to turn her around. And in 4 months, she was completely free of all of her symptoms. And even now, when she goes for checkups, the doctor is astounded that she has a Tourette's diagnosis because she no longer exhibits any of those uncontrollable symptoms that she had before.
Will with that kind of a patient, will they backslide if they go back into their old habits of ways
Yeah,
of
so
eating?
yeah, with our clients, and once they get to this point, they really can tell what their triggers are. So my son, for example, symptom free, unless he goes out and gets a little wild and eats something he shouldn't eat. We know that sugar, gluten, dairy are huge triggers for him. For a lot of my other clients, is maybe they go to a hotel and they stay in a moldy hotel, and that sets them off, and mom knows immediately, oh, got to get out of this hotel room. So yes, we do see that, and we do have clients that they are completely free of symptoms and they never have another issue. But we do see that some of them, just because their immune systems are so sensitive, when they are exposed to something that might be a trigger for them, we do see a little bit of flare, but we know how to bring it back down.
So it sounds like their immune systems have been compromised and are sensitive from that day forward.
They really can be. But for instance, with my son, we really suspect that he probably has celiac disease, so autoimmune for gluten. But we're never going to do the testing because of the requirements to consume gluten to get the test done. So we just know, hey, we're just not going to eat gluten. We know it's a huge trigger. Bye. But it's not always the same trigger for all of our clients that we work with.
What's the most common one?
Um, Definitely diet is the most common when we see mold probably being, the second highest. Um, Sugar, we see a lot of kids who struggle with eating sugar, and we know that's like a huge component of everyone's diet these days. So it's really a huge re-education of parents to get them to think in a different way because they've never thought this way before.
I know, as kids, we were fed things that were sweet because we'd eat them, right?
Absolutely. Well, they're delicious.
But we weren't impacted on the same levels that the kids today are. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, like, we were not eating the amount of sugar that kids were eating today. And I tell parents all the time, if you think back 150 years ago, 200 years ago, in a year, people were consuming 5 pounds of sugar. That's, one of those little bags of sugar. They would go to the fair, they'd get a lemonade. Maybe mom would make a cake on their birthday. It was a special occasion and everybody had a slice. But now it's estimated kids are consuming not 5 pounds, but 40 pounds of sugar a
Oh,
year.
well, we're
40
going to
pounds.
have to take a very sweet break. Dr. Gibson and I will be right back to continue our discussion. So stay right there. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. What do you mean it all starts in the gut? This
So
is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. With us discussing the increase in chronic children's disease is Dr. Piper Gibson. Her website, regenerating.health. And there we have it. We were just talking about how gut issues can really be at the root of a lot of things we're dealing with. And we're also seeing more gut issues in the young. What's causing all of that?
yeah, the story is all health begins in the gut. And I think now we, in this day and age, are really starting to see that impact. And a lot of it is because our guts are permeable, and kids' guts, especially, infants, are far more permeable than an adult's gut. We have not developed the gut of an adult. And so what happens is we have what's called these tight gap junctions that really keep our gut sealed. But when we end up with a lot of inflammation, we get a gap in that tight gap junction. And so a lot of times the allergens, the pathogens, the medications, they're seeping in to our bloodstream through these gaps in our gut. And they are causing these dysregulated immune systems because your gut and your immune system are so closely related. When we look at the gut, we know that about 80% of your immune system lies in your gut. And so when we start to see these inflammatory factors impacting the gut, we definitely see the impact on the brain. So leaky gut is really a huge issue for many of the kids who are experiencing issues today.
How about candida? There is a beastie.
Absolutely. We see candida pretty frequently. We usually see candida more frequently when it's associated with mold toxicity. Kids are living in a moldy home, or maybe they're eating a ton of grains that are toxic with mold, looking at aflatoxins and things like this. But definitely, we are seeing just increased issues with kids in general all over from all of the impact on their guts.
So for a while, we went into a major fix it with antibiotics phase. Okay, and what impact does that have on the flora fauna balance? In other words, the candida overgrowth versus the natural bugs that we need in there that help our immune system.
Yeah, I can really speak to this because in my own house, this was an issue. My son had chronic ear infections. Instead of asking, why does this kid have chronic ear infections and getting rid of the triggers like gluten and dairy that were impacting him, we put in antibiotics. And I will tell you, my son probably did 15 rounds of antibiotics every year. It was really, when I look back on it, disheartening. So I would say that was a huge driver for just the destruction of his gut and the balance and the flora that was in there. But from the genetic standpoint, we test all of our clients' genetics and we look at their gut health with their genes. And one of the genes that we look at is something called FUT2. And FUT2 has these specialized sugars that help proliferate probiotics. And so for a lot of our kids with neurological disorders, the probiotics don't really work well for them to begin with because they have this gene. So it's really important for us to look at backdoor approaches of how we support the immune system in the gut because of their genetics. So I am seeing a little bit of this connection between, the probiotic, the antibiotic, and what the kids genetically have going on in their guts in the first place.
Well, if we talk about a genetic predisposition, but then what they're learning about epigenetics can turn genes off and on. What's showing up on that arena?
Yeah. So when I look at genetics, I look at genes as a roadmap. So we look at nutrigenomics, how nutrition impacts genes, how genes impact nutrition, how it really correlates together. And so I use it as a roadmap. And I say, hey, these are your genes, but these are the things we can do in your environment to improve that genetic outcome. So we know, if you don't have good detoxification genes, for example, what should you should not be cleaning your house with bleach and pine salt and using all of these, Glade plugins and scented products and things like this. It's, how can we change your environment to improve your genetics? And for a lot of us, a lot of these genetics SNPs or variants, they've been in our bodies for generations. But because of where we live and the time period we live, we are so greatly impacted environmentally. So we use it as a roadmap to say, hey, this is what we need to change in your environment to improve your health.
So you're not really using epigenetics to shift what genes are expressing. Rather, you're using modified diets and this and that to not trigger them.
And we're using it to change the expression as well. So we really are working on that epigenetic, whatever those triggers are for those people.
A huge tool that I'm really excited to see how it develops.
Yeah, we are really loving it in practice.
So how does gut health influence things like behavior, focus, moods in kids?
Right. So if we have poor gut health, that leads to dysregulated immune system. When we talk about that gut-brain connection, then that inflammation that we're receiving from the gut that's traveling to our brains is really causing, we have specialized cells in the brain called microglial cells. Microglial cells are what function as that specialized immune system in the brain. When they get activated, we release more glutamic acid, which is very abundant in the brain and can be very excitatory. So it can have huge impacts on things like the basal ganglia, which can deal with things like anxiety and tic disorders. But we're seeing that this inflammation and dysregulated immune system pushes that immune response in the brain, causing these kids to not be able to focus and function because the main part of our immune system is to get them back on track. So their body is overloaded trying to do what it needs to get them back on track. So they can't focus, they can't function. They're not absorbing the nutrients they need because they have poor gut health. And so it's really this runaway train that we need to get back on course.
Oh, it can't happen soon enough as far as I'm concerned. Let's talk a little bit about COVID. I've had, heard a lot of reports how people that, neurologically, they seemed like they were okay, got COVID, and all of a sudden they have long COVID, but also they have these neurological tics or Tourette-like symptoms that they'd never had before. What's going on there? And have you seen that?
I have. And I really associate it with the continued inflammation from COVID. We know that COVID is really strong on the inflammation department. And so for me, when I had it, I was inflamed for 3 weeks. And really, we have to look at the fact that that inflammation is going to impact the brain. And so let's just say you get COVID and you get the long COVID, maybe you're inflamed for 3 weeks, but you are eating a crappy diet. You're not eating good food. You're eating inflammatory foods. You're sitting at night eating your, bucket of ice cream or whatever the case may be. You are just continuing to fuel that inflammation because you're not getting the nutrition that you need for your immune system to work properly. We're fueling it with sugar. And so that is another huge factor is, yes, we end up with the inflammation and we're not bringing it down. We're continuing to fuel it. So a lot of these people just continue to feel awful because they're not focusing on how do we get that inflammation and bring the immune system back down to earth.
So many of us are totally ignorant of the fact that the brain gets inflamed and creates a lot of these long COVID symptoms.
Absolutely. And it's not talked about enough. And again, I think it's really just a disconnect in how we have spoken about COVID in society for the last, 5 years at this point.
And it stays with us, doesn't it? It changes and stays with us, and we're not given the key that we need to give our bodies the best chance they have, aka diet, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just scary. So, what roles does nutrition really play in childhood health conditions?
I think it plays every role in childhood health conditions. And I tell my clients, diet matters. It's one piece of the puzzle, but it is a big piece of the puzzle. If you have a kid who's drinking a soda and some highly processed chips for lunch, and they're eating the fruit punch and the crumb cake for breakfast, when they get home and mom's busy and she's like, everybody, we're going to have some macaroni and cheese and hot dogs, we have totally missed the boat on nutrition. And I see it time and time again because I take nutritional data from my clients. What'd you guys eat every single meal for this week? And so many times I'm completely blown away that parents are like, oh, we ate pretty healthy this week, but the menu that they provide me looks just like the one that I explained. And so I think that we really miss the boat in supporting our kids. And when again, the longevity begins in the womb, it begins at birth, is we're doing these kids a disservice, a huge disservice by not feeding them what we need to fuel them. Processed food did not exist in the abundance that it does now, 200 years ago.
So let's talk a little bit about before the child is born and shortly thereafter. Um, I was floored when I had my small children. I nursed both of them, and yet they were showing these symptoms of food allergies. And I went to my midwife and I said, what's going on? She says, well, they have food allergies. I said, but I'm nursing them. I'm not feeding them food. She says, but what are you eating? So, so that brought opened up my awareness to the fact that whatever the mother eats, even if she's nursing, is going to impact the child. And of course, we're living in a toxic environment. What about the children that don't get nursed?
Yeah, I had that same exact experience. Gwilda, is same thing. My son was really experiencing these symptoms, and I was like, "What is going on?" And she's like, "Well, you can't eat dairy because he can't tolerate dairy, so stop eating the dairy." Again, when we start to look at things like infant formula and the nutritional value in them, corn syrup solids are one of the very first ingredients. So when we look at corn syrup and the impact that it has on the liver, it actually skips a step and goes directly to the liver, really causing a lot of these kids to have fatty livers. So if we think about the fact that we are basically saying this is nutritional for these kids, I think we do these families a huge disservice because a lot of them don't have another choice. Some mothers just cannot nurse. They need to have this nutrition for their child, but they are just it's so wrong, the ingredients that really don't provide the nutrition. And I know here in the US, this is one of these things that is absolutely being looked at. And the first time, I think it's like 20 years that they are looking at the ingredients in infant formula and how they can improve it, because corn syrup really is a waste byproduct of manufacturing corn products. And we're using it as one of the first sources of nutrition for infants.
Well, I remember if your baby was constipated, just put a little bit of corn syrup in there,
Mhm.
and what's that tell you, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, just amazing. So also there's the baby prepared baby food. What's in that?
Yeah, a lot of the testing of the prepared baby food starts to look at the fact that there's things like heavy metals in there, looking at things like the lead content. We know when we look at lead content that it's basically on a scale, the highest levels really impacting those infants. And so we've looked at different forms of baby food. I mean, we have all of these pouches. Oh, use the pouch. Well, the pouch also has maybe BPA liners in it. There's plastic. There's all of these microplastics, things that your kids are getting in the baby food. Really you'd be better off getting some organic carrots and peeling them and steaming them and, making your own baby food. But not every mother or parent today has that time or capacity to do so. But, and so much of it is the first food you want to feed them is rice cereal or oat cereal. And I'm like, you're feeding your kids grains, which the grains can lead to the fact that we don't absorb nutrients and then we end up with leaky gut. So we really need to evaluate what those first foods for infants should be in the first place after nursing or formula.
And they tend to start them too early, is in my way of thinking. The child's not ready to be able to absorb them
Right.
or digest them. Yeah, yeah. So, well, it's about time for us to take another station break. On the other side, we will continue with this fascinating topic of what do we feed our babies? Stay with us as Dr. Gibson and I continue to explore the potential causes of children's disease. This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. Is it a diet problem or an absorption problem? This is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Piper Gibson. Her website, regenerating.health. We've mentioned in the course of this hour that not only aren't we getting the nutrition we need, but there's gut health issues going on. Are we to the point that even starving amongst plenty, basically, and even if we do get the nutrition, our guts so out of alignment that we aren't absorbing it?
Yeah, I definitely see that daily when working with clients, is that they're just not absorbing the nutrients. And a lot of parents are going to go out and they're going to spend a small fortune on supplements. And I'm like, well, hold on a second. Your kid's not absorbing them. You're throwing your money in the trash. Let's get their gut back on track first. Let's feed them a good whole foods nutritional diet and get their gut back on track. And then we can fill in the gaps with the supplements. Supplements are really meant to be a supplement. It's not meant to be the be all end all. And so it's really about, how do we get the gut back on track? Let's remove some of these triggers for you. Let's remove the foods you're sensitive to. Let's get out some of these chemicals that you're using in and around your home, what you're cooking on, storing your food in, these kinds of things. Let's get your gut back on track and then determine what supplements are really going to be supportive of that.
All supplements aren't made the same either, are they? I mean, you go to Walmart and Lord knows what you get.
That's exactly right. And, when we start to look at some of these studies, I actually just did a YouTube talk on this. High quality supplements matter. I mean, you're getting some heavy metals and fillers and things if you're going to, your regular old grocery store to pick up your supplements. You really want to look at high quality supplements that in the United States are GMP certified, that have been tested by a third party. So we're making sure that, yes, we're getting what is actually in the bottle.
And then the other question I have is, how many studies have been done on what supplements we need and how much? I mean, I know there's guidelines out there, but how accurate are they?
In my opinion, not very accurate. We talk about RDA a lot, which is that recommended dietary allowance. And so for us, when we look at RDA, it's those recommendations are meant to keep you from getting sick, to keep you from getting scurvy, to keep you from getting rickets. They're not meant to give you optimal health. And so when somebody comes in and says, oh, I have a vitamin D level of 20 and my doctor says it's acceptable, we're going to say, that might be acceptable by RDA standards, by your doctor's, blood work standards. RDA really doesn't recommend a high dose of vitamin D. But we know all of these people who are getting sick from low vitamin D. So we have to take into account that RDA, what those recommendations and guidelines are general. They do not affect everybody, and they do not affect everybody equally, because you may have a genetic variant that keeps you from utilizing vitamin D properly. And you may need twice the vitamin D that I need based on your genetics. And so they really are a guideline just to keep you from getting sick. You don't want everybody to have scurvy from vitamin C deficiency, but not meant to give you optimal health.
And the proof is in the pudding, right? If those guidelines were so effective, we wouldn't be seeing all this illness, would we?
Exactly.
So, what are tic disorders?
So tic disorders are uncontrollable body movements. Most people are familiar with Tourette's syndrome. Tic disorders are, Tourette's is a form of tic disorder. So it is an uncontrollable body movement, usually consisting of either a motor movement, so maybe they're blinking their eyes or jerking their neck, or a vocal movement. Many people will, my son wanted to say burrito 900 times just repetitively, or they clear their throat, or maybe they're humming. So there's a clear vocal or motor tic. And then in order to get a Tourette's diagnosis, you have to have both a vocal and motor tic for over a year, and then they'll diagnose you with Tourette's. So, very similar. We also see pandas in there as coming up on the rise. But that's really what a tic disorder is, that uncontrollable body movement.
And you're starting to track that back to nutrition and environmental toxins?
Nutrition, environmental toxins, biotoxins. When the kids come into our practice, we're going to do all of the testing. We're going to really look at what's going on in the root. And it's different for everybody. But at the root of it is really this dysregulated immune system. What's causing it? For some kids, it's a parasite and heavy metals. For some kids, it's candida and mold. For some kids, it's gluten, dairy, candida, mold, and parasites and heavy metals. So it's really kind of different for everybody. But our goal is to figure out, well, what's at the root and what's driving this imbalanced immune system?
So is there, the brain inflammation that we look at, say from long COVID or from gut disorder, okay, is that also impacting the likelihood that you will end up with tic disorder or Tourette's or that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. There is that impact. And we know from studies that there is possibly a genetic component for tics and Tourette's. They don't know if it's one gene or multiple genes, but really suspected, yes, there's a genetic component. But like I explained to clients, okay, so there's a genetic component. Just because you have that genetic component doesn't mean you're going to get it. For example, we know with my son, if we control his environment with diet and lifestyle, he has no symptoms. So really, we have to look at, just because you may or may not have the gene doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get it. We can alter your environment to impact your symptoms instead of just putting a Band-Aid on it.
So that also explains why you see these things passed down family lines. At the same time, there's environmental factors.
Yep.
So what makes your approach to tic disorders different from the conventional treatments?
Right. We are working to reverse symptoms naturally. The parents that come to me are the ones who've tried the 9 million different medications. They've been to doctor after doctor. They're ready to get off the insanity merry-go-round. And so what we are really looking at is, how are we going to reverse them naturally? Doing diet and lifestyle approaches. We do use supplementation in there as well. But our approach is to get them there naturally, because we know studies from the Cincinnati Children's Hospital tells us medications for tic disorders and Tourette's do not cure tics and Tourette's, and rarely do they reduce symptoms more than 50%. So when we're looking at the approaches for tic disorders, the natural approach that we use in my practice actually works far better than putting a Band-Aid medication on it.
So what are functional labs and how do they help uncover hidden imbalances that normal labs miss?
Right. So if you go to your doctor and you get a lab drawn, it's usually a diagnostic lab. They're looking at blood work to give you a diagnosis. We're looking at functional lab work. What's going on deep in the body, and how do we return proper function to the body? So for example, we use stool pathogen testing. Stool pathogen testing from a functional perspective is to be able for us to be able to look at the gut and really analyze what's going on with the microbiome. Are there parasites? What pathogens are there? What does the balance look like? How can we use this to return normal function to the body? So we're not using it to give a diagnosis. I don't care what your diagnosis is. I'm not going to give you a diagnosis. I want to know what's at the root and how can we reverse it and get you back on track.
Let's talk about diagnosis. What are they really?
A label. They are a label. And something that I have seen that's so disheartening is that so many adults and kids get this label and they just simply write it off. Well, I can't do that. I have ADHD. I'm so sorry that happened. I have OCD or whatever the case may be. And we're really relying on that label as our excuse or our personality or our identity is really how I see most people. They have an autoimmune immune disease. That's their identity. That's what they become. And I'm like, no, it is a label for the symptoms that you are experiencing. And we could actually look at the symptoms you're experiencing, figure out what's at the root, and get you back on track.
So the label is just for a collection of symptoms. How accurate is the label? Because there's lots of different collections of symptoms.
Exactly. Well, and it depends on which doctor you go to for your diagnosis. And it depends on, for so many of these kids with neurological disorders, it's who observed you, not what test did you run, what did you, diagnostic stuff did you look at, but who observed you. So we're not even using a diagnostic tool like blood work to give a diagnosis. We're just observing them and diagnosing. So we're putting a label on their symptoms and not really figuring out what's going on any deeper.
So we put a label on it, and then we look in the drug encyclopedia for what you use to mask the symptoms. And does that sum up our medical profession?
Sadly, for a lot of people, it does. It really does. I know in our case and in a lot of my clients' cases, like that's the case. I mean, we went for second opinion after second opinion after second opinion. And, I had doctors that were like, I would give my kid all 8 of these drugs at the same time. It's okay. And then we'd go to the next doctor and he'd be like, absolutely not. I would never put my kid on all those medications. Take them out. So there's that conflicting between who you see and who's giving you that label.
How much of the doctor's continuing education comes from the drug companies?
Depending on, who you're working for, a significant amount. If you're working for a big conglomerate who is really influenced by those companies, absolutely a lot of your continuing education is most likely provided by those companies. But if you're, a functional practitioner and you're out looking for your own continuing education, you are going to get a whole different window.
Well, our doctors are doing the best they can. They
Oh
don't have,
yeah.
they aren't getting the information they need. They're too busy to go back to school, even if it was there. What do you see as a solution to this?
I really think there needs to be somebody to fill the gap. And I like to view myself as one of those that fills the gap. You need your doctor, you need your physician for, you get a horrible infection and you need an antibiotic or whatever the case may be. You need your doctor and you need your physician. But they are so busy. They have so many patients on their list. They cannot spend, insurance regulations here really limit them to about 7 minutes. So if you have somebody like me or, a health coach or somebody on your team that can really fill the gaps and, okay, your doctor said this is what you need to do. We can break it down for them and make it so much easier for them to understand. So we get to spend so much more time with them analyzing their lab work and analyzing their data. I mean, we're going to sit for hours looking at all of this information. So I think if we could have more people that fill that gap, that could help spend that time with physicians, patients who don't have that time, we would start to see a huge difference.
Well, it's about that time in the show when I get to ask you, Dr. Gibson, what's your mission?
My mission is to help as many families as possible reverse their child's tic disorder symptoms naturally.
Well, that's a good mission. Sounds like you're branching out quite a bit, though, as well, aren't you?
I am. So I am also the co-owner in a genetics company called Elite Gene Labs. I have a deep, deep passion for nutrigenomics because it changed my son's life and it absolutely changed my life as well. And so we have a practitioner training program where we are training providers to utilize nutrigenomics in practice. So they become an integrative genomics specialist.
Well, it's been wonderful having you on the show, and I thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Gwilda. It was an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Gibson and I are going to call it into the show because we're out of time. Dr. Gibson is a functional medicine and holistic nutritional expert and the author of Tic Talk: Common Misconceptions, Natural Approaches, and Real Conversations about Tic Disorders. To find out more about Dr. Gibson, where you can find her book and all she has to offer, visit her website, regenerating.health. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join us again right here next time on the X Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net, where this mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.